Hi there, welcome to the God's Eye Production Podcast. I was reading this article and I thought it was really interesting and I wanted to riff on it a little bit. Highly recommend it. I'll put it in the show notes. It's about how singing can strengthen our self-control, and it goes into the fruits of the Spirit. So worship, and we've gone over it before, worship isn't just about praising the Lord with harps and lyres and things like that, but worship as a form of music is what we're talking about this week. So when you think about worship, it's kind of more of what traditionally people think of as worship, I guess, even though we've talked about how that's only one form, but worship with music. So a lot of discipline goes into the creation of music. Now, we're not just talking about music here, like classical music. In this specific instance, we're talking about worship music and how it can get us closer to God. So we practice, and the article goes into that we practice to be able to have an unction of the Holy Spirit and lead from that. So basically, like a good jazz musician, they just suddenly go off the cuff and they kind of go all over the place. But they've had many years of practice with the people that they're with, and those people have had training and practice too, so they can just go off onto a tangent and then come back to the melody. So that's one reason why we want to cultivate the discipline of music. But one thing that I thought was really interesting here is how it related it back to Ephesians 5. I'll put a link to the whole chapter of Ephesians 5, but specifically 18 through 21. We sing not merely to express sudden emotion, but to cultivate the fruit of the Spirit, self-control. And it talks about not being drunk, but having sobriety, understanding, and submission. So it kind of goes into Ephesians 5 a little bit more, and you can kind of go with that too. But one thing I thought was really cool was that worshipful singing is the opposite of drunken debauchery. So basically, it's kind of trying to tie everything together, but the main thing that I'm focused on is congregational singing here, so kind of more of your traditional hymns, I guess. And you can go with contemporary worship music too, but I never thought about singing being a spiritual discipline to help us practice self-control, because it helps us manage our time, focus our minds, regulate our emotions, and strengthen our relationships and our control of our bodies. I never thought about it like that. So with managing our time, you got to make sure your time signatures are correct and that the busy distractions of the world are being kind of released. Because when you're in music, you're in a space of worship, you're in a space for that kind of mentality. So basically the world has to back up and the devil has to back up too so that God can move. And it talks about an eternity of unending praise, and we've talked about it before. I'm not going to sing for 100 years or 1,000 years in the clouds with harps and lutes and lyres. If that's your shtick, that's fine. Absolutely go for it, but I'm a doer. I don't mind jumping in there and doing it every now and then, but I'm going to be a doer. I'm going to be a gopher. God says, go for this, go for that, and I say, okay. So that's my form of worship, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's your form of worship, and that's okay. One thing I really loved about this is how it talked about that our self goes away when we're doing a congregational. So, for instance, somebody's singing off-key. The people who sing on-key in a spirit of unity will come up to help that off-key person either get on-key or to balance out that off-key. But it also talks about how when our self rises up in the pride, the devil will try to get in there and kind of break up the harmony and throw a rotten egg in it, basically, of ego and be like, oh, well, no, I got to be a soloist. The person beside you says, oh, no, I have to be the soloist. So it's kind of a give or take, and that unity, I'd never thought about it before in that way exactly. But, you have no little eyes and big eyes. It's just us, and we're trying to sing this together. It's the same thing in the Hebraic thought when we blow the shofar. So one shofar and another shofar, each of them has a slightly different pitch, but when they're blown together with good air support, then those four shofars, or however many you have, kind of combine together as one sound. And within that, you can still hear, if you have a good ear, you can still hear the individual sounds, but it kind of comes together in a unified form. And that's kind of what we're getting to here, is that we're coming together in unity. And this stuff may be intuitive to you, but I just had never thought about it in this way before. And like I said, it just kind of hit my spirit. And I just wanted to share it and kind of riff on it a little bit. Music making improves our memories, enhances problem solving, boosts your creativity. You're strengthening your brain, you're strengthening your spirit when it's done for the edification of God. And another thing too is like it can help us regulate our emotions. Let's think back to David before he was king. He actually used to play for Saul because Saul was tormented in his mind, and that music would calm him down. So, because, he'd be strumming his harp. So, kids I used to work with when I still worked in the school system who had autism, if you could play their favorite song or find a song that would become their favorite song, it would help them calm down and regulate, because that's one thing that God does through music is to help us regulate our brains, which I never thought about that before, but being a person who loves different types of music and different genres of music, that makes sense now that I see it that way. Worshipful singing can sanctify our affections. We express rule over our emotions. And basically, it prepares us to receive God. The worship does. So when we're in a spirit of worship, and it doesn't necessarily have to be some giant big to-do where you put on Southern gospel and, they're going on and there's a lot of, I don't want to even attempt to recreate it, but there's just a lot of prolonging of the song, I guess you could say. That's not for everybody, and that's okay. And I have to be in the right headspace to do that, and that's not all the time. Sometimes I need music that's a little bit more introspective and a little bit more soaking. So like soaking worship, like listening to an instrumental hymn, for instance, like maybe Trust and Obey. We've gone over that before, or something along those lines, and that's okay. Or sometimes, depending on how I am headspace-wise, I might put on some chanting in Latin, but I look up what it's actually saying before I listen to it. And if it's theologically not quite on par, then I'm like, yeah, no. Or maybe there's another song within that. And I look up the Latin, so that way I know what they're talking about and what I'm edifying by listening to this, just to be safe and be on the same theological underpinning, I guess you could say. And that's just good practice anyway. With any song you listen to, whether it be secular or Christian, just look up what the words and lyrics actually are. Pray about it. Try to get discernment, because we've talked about it before. Discernment is also being able to discern and pull out the verses correctly interpreted through the Holy Spirit. Same thing with music. Knowing the artist's heart intentions, I think, is important. Here's something interesting, too. It says in Ephesians 5, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart, giving thanks always for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, we're all in unity here. So if somebody's singing out more, I need to lower my voice more, or maybe I need to support them in some way. Or when I came into the church, they were singing a traditional hymn, and there was somebody who was off key. And even though I had just come in, I knew automatically what we were doing. And because I had read this article earlier this morning, I actually was already in that headspace. And so I supported the people up on stage by singing in key and singing in a lower octave, so that the person who was out of tune could kind of sync up with what I was doing. Because that's the thing too, like there's different levels. And if you've done any type of music study or any type of choral study, you know that you have different levels of vocals. You got baritone, you got bass, you got a tenor, so on and so forth. And I'm not being an expert on that. There are podcasts out there where you could find that stuff, I'm sure, if you're interested. But what I'm trying to get to is when you kind of have a deeper resonant voice like I do, at least in the singing environment, it can allow people to kind of focus on that and then tune their voices up or down appropriately as needed. And any time that we were in the band, we would do the same thing. So I used to play French horn, which is a middle voice instrument. And so we would always tune to the lower instruments. So if we had a tuba or a baritone, we would tune to that. And then they would have the bass clarinet tune the other instruments in that frequency range, so on and so forth. So in the same way, that person actually has a lot harder of a time because they need to be in tune as much as possible, because we're all probably going to try to tune to them. So having the ability to pick that apart, though, is the reason I love music. I used to focus more on the instrumentation than I did the lyrics of songs. And even now, I'm more drawn to the instrumentation than I am the vocals. Now, vocals are important. Vocals are where the fruit comes in. And a lot of people actually focus on the instrumentation more than they do the lyrics, which surprises me, because there was an article about a song from the 90s that was really popular when I was a kid, and people were horrified about what it actually was about. And it doesn't need to be repeated here. The point I'm trying to get to is that they never looked up the lyrics and they were horrified by what they were actually singing when they were young kids. Being a curious person, I looked up the lyrics when we had internet capability, and I was like, oh, well, that makes sense and that's terrible, but it's a really catchy, good song, so I'm not going to stop listening to it. But a lot of these people were horrified because they'd never looked at the lyrics. So that indicates to me, and this is just a generalization, that most of the population focuses more on how it sounds than they do what it's about. So that's the reason why people can sneak these things in there, because people aren't listening to the lyrics anyway. We need to get better as a culture about that, no matter where you are in the world. I love how this talks about not having a cacophony of noise. Stronger singers temper their voices to support their quieter neighbors. Pitch perfect project to guide those with less accurate ears, and they all follow the beat established by the conductor. So in the same way, God is our conductor. So what's happening on earth in the band setting, or probably even in the choir setting in the church, they are reflecting God. So the person leading you is reflecting the Creator. You're singing, you're reflecting the creation. And the point is for us to sing as one and to be unified. And when you get into the big eyes, little me's, and all that stuff, that's when you get into trouble. And I just find it interesting how, relating this back to Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, in this case the Silmarillion, if you've never read it, Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, then maybe the Silmarillion if you're still interested, because it's a pretty language-heavy book, and it's not for everybody, but that's okay. But anyway, in his mythology, he talks about the great music that the people who are under God made. So he has Eru Iluvata, and then, so that would be God. And then under him are all these Ainur, and the Ainur are kind of like the angels. And so they're singing with their voices, and he's showing them the vision of the world that they're creating with their voice. As he says, here's the piece of music that I want you to sing. Here's what I want you to sing next. And I assume it's happening telepathically here. And anyway, one rises up called Melkor, and he starts singing his own melody, and everybody kind of starts tuning to him and not to Eru Elevata. So bringing it back into the biblical worldview, the light bulb probably went off in your brain and say, oh, well, Melkor represents Satan, and you would be correct. Tolkien was very blatant about his Roman Catholic faith, and he would speak out about it, and a lot of his stuff has the root of that in there. So there's a lot of overlap, and so that's the reason why I think that it still resonates with a lot of Christians, is because of the Roman Catholic roots of it. And if you think about the elves singing, this is just a side that doesn't cost you extra. If you think about the elves singing, like in the adaptations of the Lord of the Rings, the movies, Peter Jackson films, when they sing, that frequency that they sing at feels good in your spirit or your soul, or you're like, oh man, this is a beautiful song. And it's because it's at that frequency, I think it's 473 hertz, that kind of feels like you're healing. The elvish singing goes back to his Roman Catholic roots, because if you listen to the liturgy of the Roman Catholic Church when they're singing and chanting, and you listen to the elves, it's the same frequency. So the elves sing as part of their lives, so the elves have their own liturgy, just like the Roman Catholic Church has their own liturgy, Eastern Orthodox has their own liturgy. You could make the argument that if we listen to the same songs every Sunday morning, or do the same songs, that is a form of liturgy too. It's the repetition, and you have to be careful, and this is one reason why I think that when you're younger, it doesn't quite click in your brain. But what I've noticed is, like, the younger people that are kind of in this routine, who don't ask questions, they kind of get stuck. And like, for instance, a lot of people who turn to atheism are what they call recovering Catholics. Not always, not saying that, not making a generalization. But I think it's because when they were kids, they didn't need the repetition as much as they just needed a move of God. So here at God's Eye Productions, we try to be balanced and say, yes, we need a move of God. But then when we get older and we've walked out our faith more, we need to practice. So let's have a little bit more liturgy. Let's have a little bit more repetition. Now, being a person on the spectrum, I love routine. I love repetition. It's just the way it is. But for somebody who's neurodivergent in a different way, or neurotypical, that's probably not going to get it done. There should be some discernment if you have a child or children or grandchildren about what their spiritual needs actually are. Because for me, I would be more apt to take a child to a church where they're getting fed and they're growing in the Lord, and I can take a back seat for a little bit if I have to, because the church that they're going to might be better for them spiritually, because at the end of the day, I can go read stuff for myself and I'm going to teach them, but I also want other people teaching them about our faith too. Now, with that said, I would vet everything that your teacher for your Sunday school class or your Wednesday night class or whatever class, I would vet what they do, get to know them spiritually, get to know them as a person. That way, you know what your child's being exposed to. Absolutely. And I think sometimes we're too trusting as a society, at least in the church sphere, that maybe the theology is a little off in some places. And I'm not trying to hide behind the spirit of legalism when I say this. I'm not doing that at all. When I've taught on Wednesday nights at my church, I'm very careful, and I prayerfully consider everything I teach. And it's not because I know that people are going to come out of the bush and say, oh, you're teaching my child wrong. That's not why. It's because I feel a heavy responsibility and a burden to do it correctly, because I want these kids to grow up and have right teaching. And so that's very important to me. Now, it may not be as big of a deal as I make it out to be. I really take it seriously because I want these kids to have a good spiritual foundation. And in the same way, I'd say that you prayerfully consider where you're going to church and make sure your children are getting fed. Because I've seen the extremes. I've seen where you as a parent may be getting fed, but your kids aren't, and they're not growing, and it's all wackadoodle fun, and that's fine. I'm not saying that children's church absolutely doesn't have to be serious all the time, but when you have kids come up to the altar when the pastor says it's time for altar call, and all the little kids come up because they know something's going on, that this is the way it's supposed to be, that to me indicates a good church. Now, granted, that is not the only accurate tell of a good church. One of the things in one of the churches I used to attend that kind of threw me off a little bit was they would try to get serious, and this is also a management thing. They would try to get serious and have an altar call at children's church, but they had all this fun and they got the kids all riled up, and they didn't give them a chance to breathe or calm down before they had altar call. They would do the visual cues. They'd flip the lights off. They'd play soft music, but the kids wouldn't take it seriously because to them the whole thing wasn't as serious as it could have been because it's just fun. And so you have to find the balance and find the things that work and explain to children, hey, this is the reason why we're doing this. This is the reason why we're doing that. And we're going to take this part seriously because we're practicing. So those things are important. I myself would like to go out and take my children to a good church to get a good foundation, even if that means I'm not going to grow as much or as quickly, because I can always look up stuff for myself, or I can always learn myself. And so that's just something to consider. Anyway, going back to worship, it always also talks about controlling our bodies. So we're stewarding our bodies well, so we're not doing anything, in this case to our voices, that's going to hurt our musical witness for the Lord. So maybe we're avoiding certain foods, or maybe we're working on breath control, etc. So that's also controlling our bodies, like Ephesians 5:19 talks about. So that's also a way that we can worship God too, is by getting ready for the process of doing this. The point is, music is worship. Your mind's engaged, your spirit's engaged, your body's engaged, your ability to self-control is engaged, your ability to empathize with others is engaged. So it's all encompassing, and I never thought about it like that because it's never had a label put on it. And sometimes when we can do this stuff intuitively, we kind of let it go under the radar. And so, for instance, at one church I used to go to, they would beat the tambourines during a certain song, and the children loved to beat the tambourines, but they would do it off beat. So when I used to go there, I would do the beat right, and then the kids would start doing the beat too. And sometimes you had one or two that just didn't quite get it or understand. There's got to be grace there. Like, it's all right, you're having a good time, you're praising the Lord, it's fine. But for the ones that were learning, and they're like, oh, like this, da 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 da. Okay, got it. And then when you all kind of got together in unity, and they were keeping a singular beat, then you could kind of go off on a tangent too and do your thing. But you didn't want to outshine them. If the beat is da 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 da, you keep doing da da da, but then maybe you add a variation into it. But then if people started to get off and kind of get confused, you'd stop, because you're like, hey, we need unity in this. It's not about me. I just felt in my spirit that I needed to go a little bit out of control here, but it's made you out of control, or what the world would consider out of control. So I'm going to temper myself here so that you can still stay on the beat and stay unified with me. But then there's part of you, that little devil part, the little pride gets in there. It's like, oh, all right, you're trying to do it with me. I'll show you how to do it. Or, oh, this is really a simple music melody. Let's try it and see if you can do it like this. You got to be careful that spirit gets in there of pride, and then there's no unity, and then it's kind of like the metalcore thing all over again, as Tolkien would kind of be mentioned in his stories. For instance, if your choir or praise and worship band is getting off kilter, getting a little off key, maybe they're having a bad day and they're not going through it, or they're just going through the motions, get up there in your spirit and be like, God, help these people right now. There's things in here that are trying to sabotage this unity, trying to sabotage the equipment, trying to do all this. I mean, one day I just went up to the altar after everybody left, or before everybody got there, and I put my hand on all the equipment. I'm sure it looked really goofy to everybody there if they were paying attention, but I went there and I put my hand on everything. I said, get out of this spirit of disharmony, get out of here, you demon, because it was kind of a day where people were distracted and they weren't doing the thing. And you could just feel it in your spirit. Something's not right here. So again, that's that spirit of discernment. You're presenting your body and drawing near to God. So it says in the article, you're presenting your body as a living sacrifice. We've talked about it before. Presenting your body as a korbanot, to draw near to God, inaccurately translated as sacrifice. Open yourself to God. Here I am, arms wide open, as the song says, and I'm presenting my body to you to draw near. And I do say living sacrifice because to me that gets me in the right mindset, but for our purposes, I present my body to you so that you can draw near to me and I can draw near to you. James 4:8. So draw near to God, he'll draw near to you. I just thought this was a really cool article. I'm not going to riff on it much more, but I just had never considered it in this way. And this would be kind of more in line with, like I say, a regular praise, where saying worship is praise. You could be weeding out your garden as praise. It can be, in my case, blacksmithing is praise. It doesn't just have to be music. But being a musically inclined person and being able to kind of pick these things out, it's like, oh, I'd never considered it like that before. So I just kind of wanted to put it in here before I forgot it and while it was top of mind. So if you're interested, the article will be in the show notes. We'll link to Ephesians 5 and maybe James 4:8. Not sure where the Lord's going to lead next, but we'll see and prayerfully consider where we're going next, and we'll see you next time.